we can probably kick off now. It's a minute past past. As I said, welcome again. I'm really looking forward to an hour's discussion on decarbonisation and really what might happen in the future and what we can do about it. I'm joined by three amazing panelists who are each going to give you their vision of the future. And then we're going to have a Q&A, so please do get involved as you'd like to be. Put your questions in the Q&A, and we're going to have a nice interactive discussion. So I'd really like to ask Yasmin to start this. Yasmin Wilkes, who's the Engineering and Sustainability graduate from Geest, who's got a lot to say on this topic. Yasmin.
Thank you very much. So my vision of the future, I think sustainability hopefully is going to become the norm for how everybody lives their lives. It will just become like the minimum standard, I think, and future generations, they're going to grow up, I think, and it will already be ingrained into their thoughts, into their actions, and sustainability won't just be a buzzword anymore. That's what I'd like to think, and it's not just something that people think they have to talk about or have to show they care about. And yeah, it will just be part and parcel of everyday life. I think kids are going to be shocked when they hear their grandparents had a dirty diesel car. And I think that things like fuel stations, they're going to look so different in the future. So for transport and logistics sector, I think the future is going to look so different. But getting to that stage and what the alternative will be to that dirty diesel, I think the solution is far from being solved just yet. I would guess that most people would say or think that it's going to be electric, because we use electricity every day. If you don't have an electric car now, I'm sure you know somebody that does, and they're driving around in it just fine. But imagining having every car, every lorry, every van, every HGV on electric, I just don't think I can confidently say that I think that's where the answer is going to lie. I mean, for one, the electricity required for every vehicle to be on electric is going to be huge. We'd need a lot of renewable energy sources to be able to generate enough energy to supply the grid. And in particular, if we're looking at like the peak times when everybody's going to be plugging in their vehicles, it's hard to imagine that the grid's going to be able to withstand the strain of that demand. I know that the UK government have already tried to put in some initiatives for cars, for like car EV charging points. So they only like kick in when there's a lower demand in electricity. But for large logistics companies with large HGV fleets who operate 24/7, I can't see that is going to be like that initiative is going to work the same and is going to be transferable. So it makes you think that that's just not going to be the way that it's going to be possible, because, and as well, like the electricity required to charge a fully electric HGV is much, much greater than for a car. And I suppose that's touching on like using electricity as like a fuel. But if we're thinking about the actual manufacturing of this tech, there's going to be a huge strain on the materials that would be required to make the vehicles. So like lithium, cobalt, they're examples of rare earth materials that are needed in electric vehicles and solar panels. But I think I read that it was predicted that by 2040 we'd need there'll be a 40 times larger demand on lithium than there is today if we're trying to aim for the 2050 net zero goal. And it makes you think that that's just not going to be possible, and we don't want to be saying yes, we're going to move to electric vehicles when we're going to run out of the supply to make those technologies even before we start. And really the circular economy for batteries needs to have as much research and innovation and resource put into learning about that just as much as it is for the actual manufacturing of the vehicles. So we don't want to, obviously, so we don't run out of those materials before we even get started. So I think there's huge pressure on electric. I think that that's a good alternative to diesel, but for me, I can see it being a real mixed economy in the future in the logistics sector. One I would want to touch on the most is probably biodiesel, because they are really great for the environment, because they can have an up to 90% reduction in tailpipe carbon emissions in comparison to diesel. So a really great alternative. Problem is they do cost a bit more, and if the government was able to help subsidise some of that cost, I think we could really push forward with moving towards using biodiesels as more of a norm, and having a better impact on the environment. So I really see that being an option, especially in the interim, when maybe the supply for getting some of those electric vehicles isn't quite there yet, and so we can use those biodiesels to kind of bridge that gap and still have a positive impact. So my vision for the future, I think that companies won't be able to do any greenwashing, which I know that is a bit of a concern at the minute, because I think people are talking about this topic more, people are getting more educated, and the public are going to hold companies accountable to the promises that they make, which the transport and logistics sector, I guess, sounds a bit scary, because we don't know what the full solution is going to look like. But yeah, I think it's going to look like a mixed economy, and I think that in the end, unfortunately, sometimes it does come down to cost. It's going to be an expensive thing, and I think the question is going to be on the companies, like, what's your budget for going green?
Yeah, thank you, Yasmin. That was really interesting, and I particularly like the future where sustainability isn't a buzzword anymore, but very realistic. What are the budgets for going green? No, so thank you. I'd now like to ask Bobby to give us her view on the future, which is coming from a slightly different aspect. So Bobby's actually a customs broker specialist at CH Robinson. So please give us your view.
So yeah, my name's Bobby, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about what I think needs to be done from a company point of view and from an individual's point of view. So the next slide, please. Can I have the next slide? Flip. Thank you. So today the logistics sector takes up about 24% of the global CO2 emissions. So almost a quarter of the CO2 emissions yearly is from the logistics centre transport, the movement of goods, and that's a huge chunk where we can be doing more about it. This is partly because the demand of freight, which is only set to increase as the years go on. The few things that we can do about this is really look at what we're doing in the logistics sector and how we could be doing it differently. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So for me, I think there's 5 ways that we really can look into decarbonising logistics. First is by managing consumption. For example, reducing a ship's speed by 20% actually cuts down off 24% of the carbon emissions emitted in that journey. So if we can manage and predict the customer's consumption, we can plan better trips and journeys, and it will cut down on the amount of carbon that's actually emitted in that journey. Also, airlines can chart where they're going to go to emit less carbon, and depending on the density of carbon and more populated areas and routes, it can help in that aspect. Technical innovation. Drones have been used in the past few years to drop off deliveries, especially with Amazon, have been doing it quite a lot recently. They use a lot less carbon and yield a much lower carbon dioxide emission than diesel or natural gas vehicles. And they can also plant trees while they're doing their deliveries and gather data, which means that carbon that would be used otherwise by doing that with cars, vans, and everything else wouldn't be able to do that. Process systems and improvements. Anyone working in logistics, especially in customs, will know that we've recently done the move to CDS, which has been a challenging move, but it has been a really good thing in terms of being paperless. So CDS is now a complete paperless system. It means that there's thousands of sheets less printed every single day, thousands of trees that won't have to be cut up as much. And that really does affect our carbon footprint as a company. We also have better infrastructure. So reports and studies have shown that in some cases, bikes are 1.6 times faster than those made by the deliveries made by vans. And in a less than 100-day period, it saves over 4,000 kilograms of CO2 being emitted into the surrounding areas. It also takes up a lot less space on the roads. There's a lot less people moving them. And lastly, following policies such as ending sales of petrol and diesel cars. And one of the biggest things that I believe is tripling the amount of woodland in the UK, which brings me on to my next slide. So trees and paper use. So I'm an avid believer in prevention over cure, but sometimes you just need a bit of both. The UK, for example, only has 13% of its land covered by trees, and it should be about an average of 37% in the EU. There's some numbers on there, but basically a truck journey for 5 hours emits more CO2 than a tree can absorb in a year, which is a scary thought considering the amount of trees being cut down and still the amount of deliveries being done every day. One of the best and most productive ways to tackle climate change is by planting more trees. If we go on to the next slide, there's something that shows, so something that everyone can do, and it literally takes 2 minutes out of your day, is change your default browser to Ecosia. What it does is for every 45 searches that you put in, they plant a tree. At the bottom, you can see there's almost 170 million to date trees that they've planted. They do it in places that really need it, such as Australia, Uganda, Spain. And taking CH Robinson, for example, we've got about 18,000 employees. If every day one employee made one internet search, in a year, that would be 200,000 extra trees. So I can only imagine the impact it would have if everyone in logistics, every office worker changed to this browser. It takes 2 minutes to set up, and it can cause literally a world of difference. So I guess my vision for the future is very much a green one, very literally. I think this is something that we can do today. This is something that takes 2 minutes and will create change for the future. And this is something that we don't have to wait for the government or for our managers or anything. This is something that can be done now. They also publish where their money comes from. It's all from ads. All their money goes to planting trees. All of it is to try and, especially in rural areas and areas that don't have this access. And you can look at where your trees have been planted per se. So yeah, that's my vision for the future.
Thank you, Bobby. Now that was really interesting, and particularly the fact that one tree a year won't offset a 5-hour journey is quite phenomenal. But yeah, you had some really positive ideas there as well about things we can do. And I'd now like to come across to Stephanie, who's a transport planner at Mott McDonald's and has her take on what the future looks like.
Can I get some slides up, please? Thank you very much. So I wanted to start off with a few basic principles that we need to keep in mind to understand our world. We live in a finite world with finite resources. In other words, it means that the quantities of available non-renewable resources are limited. Within our lifetime, that of our parents and grandparents, we have been experiencing a periodic doubling of almost everything around us, from life expectancy, population levels, technological innovations, GDP growth, as well as energy consumption, and the number of kilometers traveled per person, to name just a few. These unprecedented rates of growth in virtually every area of our lives are all examples of exponential growth. Next slide, please. Like the curve that you see on this slide. It's not really showing full screen, but that's okay. Yet we live in a finite world, which means that the exponential growth we have been experiencing is not sustainable. In other words, thinking that infinite growth in a finite world is possible is very much alike to believing in Father Christmas or the Easter Bunny. Next slide, please. Oops, what slide are you on? No, the slide that says today, please. Yeah, perfect, thank you. Up until today, our energy has been plentiful and unrealistically cheap. Machines have transformed the way we live, travel, and consume. For example, over the past 70 years, cars have become a common sight in our lives. We have modeled the growth of road infrastructure based on a predict and provide approach, always predicting more cars, more growth, more movement, all because resources have been seen as limitless and abundant. This has created pollution, inequalities, and global warming that affects the whole world. Today, we are at a point of needing to stop producing greenhouse gases, CO2 if we wish to stay below 1.5 or 2 degree change by the end of the century. Yet people will have you believe that you can just level out our exponential growth habits, very much like the red line on the slide, through the act of decarbonizing our current way of life. For example, by simply switching from internal combustion engines to battery electric vehicles. Let's define a few key buzzwords. Sustainability, the ability to meet our own needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Resilience, simply put, it is the ability to recover from a negative event. Net zero carbon refers to the balance between the amount of greenhouse gas that we produce and the amount that our planet is able to absorb. I hope that you can all see the challenges that we face this century. The future is uncertain, but what is certain is that we will need to learn to live with less, potentially as little as where the green line is, to ensure we stay within the renewable limits of our planet. Next slide, please. To face the challenges of tomorrow, we need to decide what can be done today and provide the means of achieving those goals at a global level. Think of the green line as our softest way down in a world with less affordable energy. In a decarbonized world where we have gotten our priorities straight, established a hierarchy of needs, and started thinking of our climate actions as a collective and global war effort to save our planet. We need to ask ourselves, what can we live with less of? How quickly can we adapt to less cheap on-demand energy? The yellow line would be a realistic path for a future system that our fragile system goes down. We only have to read the headlines of the past few weeks to realize the absurdities of some of our current habits. UK supermarket shelves have been empty of what some deem essential, such as fresh tomatoes in February, grown over 1,000 kilometers away in North Africa. But more seriously, and less spoken about, we have seen a global shortage in some medicine all winter. The orange line is what could happen if we don't act realistically between now and 2050. In the next 30 years, we need to have seen a 5% year-on-year reduction of CO2 and greenhouse gas levels to meet the objectives of the Paris Accord. That means a global reduction in energy expenditure, like we saw during the first lockdown of the COVID pandemic in 2020, year-on-year until 2050. We need to decide and provide realistic ways for us to live with less. And if we don't wake up now and realize that we are severely addicted to cheap energy, we will embark on a steep and uncontrolled descent along the red slope. We need to admit our habits are killing the planet and jeopardizing our future, and that of children born today. On a global scale, we will be faced with increasing inequalities, compounded with climatic change that will cause massive population displacements, famines, and wars. What is uncertain today is how rapidly we will need to adapt to these challenges ahead. Next slide, please. I like to think about what my vision for tomorrow is in a decarbonized world as having aged gracefully. For most of us, aging is not a pleasant thought, but it is inevitable. In my mind, the aging gracefully of transport means that we need to transport less often, less far, less fast. Loads of options can be implemented to break our addiction to cheap energy. We can think global and act local, learn from the past. Less than 300 years ago, our world was net zero. What can we learn from 150 years ago? We can adopt low-tech solutions such as slow and active modes of travel, ensure we live in 15-minute cities, Provide a really public transport option. Introduce carbon tokens and ask for the ones with the most means to contribute more. We can also reduce, reuse, and recycle, such as having fewer personal vehicles per household, regardless of energy types, and ensuring those cars are ultralight. No one needs a 2-ton tank to move on average 70 kilos. We can reallocate road space for slower and lighter modes, helping extend the life of existing infrastructures. We can rethink our last mile logistics. We live on an island and can explore alternatives to road freight, such as making use of our ports and waterways to ensure trucks don't need to drive those essential winter tomatoes from southern Spain to Aberdeen. I would like to leave you with a simple image in mind to illustrate the choices we can make. Take, for example, the resources required to produce one battery for a Model 3 Tesla. It weighs around 600 kilos. Those same resources can be used to produce 200 e-bike batteries. The same energy expenditure could then benefit 200 people. Or we could just leave it all in the ground and use what we already have available. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was really interesting. And I really like the concept of the global war effort to save the planet. That's really very, very evocative. You raised a number of really interesting points. And I think the one I'd like to put to the whole panel to start with, and this is one of my questions, I'll get back to the audience ones in a minute, is does technology have a role to play in the answer to this, or is it behavioural change? Who would like to go first? Yasmin? Oh, Bobby, you've come off mute. Bobby, do you want to answer?
I think it's very much 50-50 of the technical change and the behaviour. I think we have to have the technology there, but without people wanting to be behind it, the technology means nothing. I think there's a lot of unanswered still of how we want to move forward, and people have opposing opinions. So it's more about the research. And I mentioned before with drones delivering, they actually collect research and collect the data while doing them deliveries. So it could also feed back into having lighter vehicles and fewer vehicles doing, instead of one big heavy vehicle. That could be a way around it. But again, we need the technology to look into it. So I do think technology plays a very key part in decarbonising transport.
Yasmin?
Yeah, I think technology is a huge part of the answer. I do get that, like, obviously it's to do with it's people who will drive that change, but also it's like the government regulations. So forcing companies to meet certain goals means that they have to speed the technology industry has to speed up to meet those regulations so that companies can become net zero by whatever year. I do think there is probably some argument where behavioral change can kind of free up some maybe like electricity, like capacity on sites and in houses to be able to like have, say, like vehicles charging on sites, so that there is that capacity spare on site if they're being more energy efficient in the operation and then like in the house or in a warehouse or wherever it is. But the amount that not turning a light off, for example, the amount of energy that would save is much smaller to the energy that's required by a vehicle to be charged. So I think it's more on the technology side that I think we have to find that answer, I think.
Stephanie, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I don't think technology is the solution, because everything that we develop that is new will require new resources to develop something that we don't even know is going to lead us in a direction that will meet our deadlines in time. Yasmin, you did a great job of pointing out how lithium and cobalt are running low. And if we were to change the whole fleet of vehicles, whether they're just the freight or personal vehicles as well, to electric vehicles, we'd be running out of those resources. So technology still today requires a lot of new elements to be dug out of the ground. And in order to dig those out the ground, we need diesel and petrol to get the mining to bring them out. So no, I think we have enough already as it is, and we can and we should learn to deal with what we have instead of inventing new things. Even though as a species, we're really good at trying to invent new solutions instead of learning to use what we have.
Oh, that's interesting, Stephanie. And again, I'm going to take chairman's prerogative and slip another question of my own in. So how do we make the circular economy something that's really mainstream and everybody accepts it, for this, you know, reuse, recycle, rather than at the moment, I think it's sort of seen as a bit niche and nobody's quite sure how it works. So I'm going to come back to Stephanie and then go back around the group. But how do you think we can build the circular economy in so it's got a more positive image, and if nobody thinks twice about say recycling something or reusing something?
So it definitely is behavior change based, but we also need to go back and look at how our grandparents lived. Mine were in between the two wars, but a lot of how they lived was very much innate reduce, reuse, recycle, because there wasn't much to be had. So you took care of what you had around. You weren't going to buy a £5 shirt, use it once and get rid of it again. I think it has to be, I don't really want to say for some people, but it becomes something you have to do when you have no other choice. That's what our grandparents did. That's what our parents in the 70s did. And as more consumers goods became available and cheap, we just forgot those habits. But I know as a people, we have those habits. And each time family or friends fall on hard times, they rediscover that they can use kitchen scraps to create, I don't know, broths for a soup and just make everything go longer. So we have it, we just have to relearn it.
Bobby, have you got any thoughts on the circular economy?
Yeah, I think the whole aspect of it's making something valuable so then you can keep using it again. I think the only thing that really adds value is the education behind it, educating people on why it's so important that we get all the use out of it that we can. And I don't think that's talked about enough, especially if people are buying clothes online, they're ordering several sizes and then they're getting free delivery to send it back. They're not understanding the implication behind that. I think if that was educated more than just seeing that you get a sale or a discount, it would open people's eyes up to a world of the value behind what you're doing, not just the value behind the item that you've got. So yeah, I guess that's it.
Thanks. Yasmin?
I think it's similar to probably a lot of different topics, but it's something that needs to be like taught about at school as well more. It's something that like is ingrained when you go to school. It's part of the learning, part of the things that like at school you learn to recycle, and and you learn the reasons why you're doing it, and then that's what in generations to come will have that knock-on effect. I think we're starting to see that now. I think being sustainable also is maybe a popular thing, I would say. There's like a lot of influencers out there who are really championing stuff like this, and that's also what's giving the push to do it, that it's more of quite a popular thing to do. And the more people that do it, I think people feel bad for not doing it. And I think that is also how we can probably kind of like tap into that too, to make the changes. But I think it is the younger generation that need that to educate those, to get it more mainstream and as like a fun, normal topic that people talk about day to day.
Oh, excellent, thanks. There's been a few questions in the chat really about the viability of, oh, Stephanie, did you want to come in?
Yeah, could I just comment on what Jasmine just said?
Sorry.
I feel the circular economy and the reduce, reuse, recycle approach are slightly different in the sense that circular economy is about generating that wealth and keeping it in a certain area. The reduce, reuse, recycle starts off with reduce what you need, reduce your consuming, reduce your waste, reduce your expenditure, and then you reuse what you have. And the recycle is really the very, very last option you have for an item that has been used down to its thread, if it's a piece of clothing or a vehicle or something that just can't be reused anymore. It gets recycled. But
thank you. I was going to move on to the chat a little bit, there's a lot of discussion about electric vehicles. We've talked about it briefly, about the viability of them, not only the production of the batteries, including the lithium for the batteries, but also the ethical issues around where some of these minerals are found. So if we, I suppose, if we're looking at it at alternative propulsion systems as a whole, what considerations are there that we need to take account of? And I suppose, does net zero trump human rights in some extent? How do we set our priorities? So lots and lots of questions there. But let's start with electric vehicles. You know, what are your views really on the battery technology? I know we've touched on it and how viable that is, you know, longer term going forwards, or is it a bit like somebody once called it the Betamax? We're going to have it for a couple of years and something else is going to come along instead. Who'd like to start? Nobody catching my eye. Bobby? Oops, you're struggling to come off mute. Yeah.
I'll step in if you want.
Okay, yeah.
I agree with the question that electricity and battery operated vehicles are not the one old holy grail for the future. But as I said in my little presentation, my vision, it's the question of just reducing how far we go, how much we move, and it's a bell curve. Everything that has gone up will have to come back down. What we need to do now is decide how smooth a path we want it to go down with. And digging the last resources out of the earth is definitely not the path I would choose.
Thanks. Yasmin?
Yeah, I think it's a hard, I think it's a difficult debate to know where you feel like you're solving one problem and then causing another problem. And I agree. I don't think we should be going for electric for everything. I don't think it's just not going to be possible. I don't think. And putting sustainability is not just about the environment. It's about the social side too, and that should be just as important. And if it's going to impact like the create ethical problems, I think that does need to be strongly considered. I don't know if that's the way that most people think about it though, and I think that maybe leaders don't think about that as much as, because I do see that most people talk about electric, and so I suppose it is concerning. I think there will be some problems. I don't know what the solution is in the other hand, but for having a mixed economy, having different options, trialing a lot of different fuel types, I think is the only way that we can work towards having that mixed economy, so we're not just reliant on electric and on batteries.
Bobby, did you get your? There we go.
Should be working. Yeah, sorry about that. I think in terms of electric cars, I see it more in the short term, I guess, with more with individuals, kind of like commercial cars. I don't know where we are yet in terms of the logistics sector as a long-term solution. I think it does have to be quite a balancing act of what we can do and how far can we push it. But I don't know where the future lies. I think we haven't discovered yet what the long-term solution is. And I think we need the technology behind that and the push to really have a sustainable long-term logistical aspect of it.
No, excellent. And there's been some discussion in the chat about hydrogen. And David Wilson points out that green hydrogen at the moment is roughly less than 3 times efficient at converting electricity into movement, but also places where you can generate hydrogen cheaply with a lot of solar power, excess hydroelectric, it might be a way of you know, you storing those renewable resources. Does anybody, and also there was a mention about using hydrogen in aviation. Does anybody have any views? Obviously, hydrogen in aviation has possibly got a bad reputation for things that have happened in the past. But how would you feel about getting into a hydrogen-powered plane or a hydrogen-powered car or a train. Yasmin, do you want to start with that one?
I do think hydrogen is a real option, especially for like those longer journeys that vehicles do. There just needs to be, I think we need more trialing. I know obviously that the aviation have done a lot, they're a bit more ahead, I think, of like HGVs and stuff, which is more where my knowledge is. We definitely do some more trials in HGVs and stuff like that, but green hydrogen, yes, I think is a good renewable solution, but I think there is concerns about when there's, you know, at the peak demand, trying to generate that could become a problem if we're trying to generate loads of green hydrogen at the same time as we're trying to power everything else. I think that there is a concern there, but I do think there is a possible solution. There just, I think, needs to, there's more to investigate there, I think.
Stephanie, do you want to come in next?
I really feel there's going to be a diversity of fuels that are going to be used in smaller quantities going forward, just as everyone tests out things while they realize that, well, moving less is going to be the solution. But they all have their inconveniences, they all have their positives, and their converts or their supporters. Definitely agree with Yasmin that we are going to see a mix. It's not going to be a whole fleet moving on to electric or a whole fleet moving on to hydrogen. When it comes to airplanes, I mean, we all know they produce a lot of CO2 right now, and they're not the sustainable mode of transport. There's other ways of traveling if those travel are deemed essential.
Oh, thank you. Bobby, have you got anything you'd like to add?
Mostly just piggybacking off both Yasmin and Stephanie said, I think it's going to be hybrid of everything until we figure it out. But I think more importantly, it's about finding a solution that uses the least amount. So instead of, like I spoke about earlier, instead of delivering by van, you can deliver by bike, working things that could actually be a net zero solution rather than trying to figure out the bigger ones. But of course, there's not always ways to get around that. I think it's just going to be a big trial and error, and different companies can have different approaches. So I think it's going to be a big mismatch of things.
Excellent. And Nick Bridle has added a very interesting comment, which is, what is the impact on water supply if we use it to create green hydrogen? I've got to say, that's a fascinating question, and although I know the chemistry behind it, I'm not sure what the answer to that would be. So I think I may have to park that one and look it up later. Jörg Schipp wanted to move things on a little bit and talk about the built environment. So as well as having transport, we've obviously got warehouses, we've got factories, we've got all of that. Have any of you come across any really good ideas for how we can reduce the carbon in the built environment and the manufacturing processes? I know what your answer is going to be, Stephanie. Go on.
Build less.
Anything more practical? Well, not practical, but any good case studies you've heard of where people have either built less or have managed to do more? What they've
there's
got.
probably a need of sharing resources in between companies. Your warehouse is not always at its fullest, but maybe your neighbor is overfull. So finding a way of sharing the resources that you have, sharing maybe the vehicles that you have as well, on the roads. You can put different logos on the same company on a truck. You can change them as you want. I think, yeah, we need to learn to share a bit more.
Yasmin, you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of different wins that you can get. I think Stephanie's picked on a few good ones there. Using double-decker trailers instead of flats to go places, that's going to reduce the number of trips that you're doing by a lot. Yeah, and I mean, there is a bit of a balance. I suppose automation is also something that can reduce improve your efficiency. Obviously we use more electricity, but if your warehouse has that capability where like the balance like shifts, where it would become more advantageous to have some automation in, then I think that is I feel like that is going to be the future, and I think that is the way that a lot of warehouses will end up going.
Mm-hmm. Bobby?
Oh, okay. Sorry, this reminded me of something. I was speaking to a logistic coordinator the other day, and they do the logistics of moving all the freight and everything you'll need for concerts. And they were saying how it's a big struggle because just to do one concert, we're emitting loads of CO2 into the atmosphere. So what he's done to combat that is, it's with Coldplay, Ed Sheeran, they've now got wind turbines, and they've got things, so it's not just net zero, it's actually going beyond that, and it's giving back to their surroundings, and they choose to do it via rail instead of air. So they're more spaced out, the concerts, so it's not as good for the public per se, but it is much better for the world. So I think if people take that into their sort of situation, when you're never going to get around building new things and emitting CO2 into the atmosphere, but if we're very mindful about how we do it, we can create a better world in the process.
That's interesting. It does remind me, I can't remember if it was a concert or a building where they were actually putting electricity generation into the floor, so the footfall of the people walking across the floor or dancing would generate some electricity. But I'm not quite sure the extent of that and how commercially feasible it might be. But it was a very interesting concept of looking at things differently. So there's been a lot of sort of discussion about different ways of powering vehicles and different ways of operating. But if we think about what can we do differently without damaging the industry, you know, it pays all of our bills, and we don't want people to stop having deliveries. But what can we do? How can we think to make sure we can support our profession in the industry going forwards, and obviously all the jobs, which is well over 2 million in the UK, but at the same time make some changes where, as Stephanie would say, some of those changes do involve having less and doing less. So how can we work to save the industry and the jobs, but being greener? Who'd like to start? Bobby? Yeah,
I think one of the best ways we can do it is having people do the deliveries on bikes. I think that might even create more jobs, but they do, in the study that I've looked up, deliveries on bikes are quicker by 1.6% more than vans. They can get around a lot easier. They are not having to, you know, there's no petrol or diesel or anything involved. So it's a way to keep jobs sustainable and to emit less CO2. So I think companies looked into that more so with the smaller loads of freight, like Amazon Prime, for example, could be delivering those parcels instead of having a big van delivering a little envelope, which doesn't quite make sense in the big grand scheme of things. So I think that is a way that companies could be more mindful.
Yasmin?
I think Bobby actually said a really good point earlier about rail. I think if logistics companies, especially you're traveling from the top of Scotland somewhere down south of England, there's no, if it's an ambient, especially if it's an ambient product, if you're moving food or anything that doesn't need to be kept chilled as well, and like why shouldn't it go on rail? That would be such a good other option, rather than having one vehicle or vehicles going up and down the country. I think that's crazy. We should be moving to rail more. And I think that another thing is that I think companies need to be more mindful and maybe think about where they are, like where maybe their businesses are, where their sites are. So are they really taking advantage of the building? So are they getting all of this, like the solar, all the sun that they taking advantage of that and creating their own energy on site? Are they near the water, near the seaside, near the coast? Should they be putting up wind turbines? And really like just try to think outside of the box in terms of like how they can be self-generating electricity for themselves, because in the future it will save them money with time. So yeah, I think just being more mindful of where they are and where they're located in the country.
Thanks. Stephanie?
I would say, well, use less because putting solar panels on your roofs is a good idea maybe 30 years ago when there was more resources to go around. Today, you still need to dig those out. You have to ship them over. We don't have the capability in the UK to build that technology. It has to come from elsewhere. So create the workforce first would be a good step, but it doesn't take away from the fact that you're still producing more pollution in order to get those sustainable or gimmicks, I want to say, on roofs of buildings. When it comes to bikes, I love the idea. But how can we solve the problem that most of our resources come from all four sides of the globe? We can't cycle them or pedal boat them across. So it's a question of thinking, where are our essentials coming from? We don't want tomatoes from North Africa in the middle of winter. Maybe we don't want tomatoes in winter altogether. So it's a behavioral change that we need to grapple with and realize that we can have a great life with a lot less. And yeah, we don't need a lot of what's around, but it's realizing that it could be better tomorrow without feeling as though we're losing too much from today. But as long as we push that idea back and not face what's coming our way, we're going to wake up one day with a really sore head and realize that, well, we missed our chance.
So I'm going to take a slightly different tack. So looking at the future, we've all, we're in our careers at various stages. There's going to be generations coming behind us. And, generation, come this summer, people will be leaving school, leaving university, joining the profession. What future skills do you think they need to have, or what should they be thinking of to help us equip the industry better to look to the future? Who'd like to answer that one first?
Yeah, I think no matter what this question's in regards to, I think one of the most important things someone can bring with them to their career is ambition. And I think especially in this aspect, it's they need to want a better world for them, a better world for everyone. If they have ambitions to do that, then anything's possible. The next people in our careers are going to be the ones making a change like we are. People after that are hopefully going to be keeping that change up. So it's really just the determination. I don't think there's any special skill set that you need. I think it's something that you need to want. It's something you can learn about it, but it is something that you need to want to make a change in the world, because it's the world you're living in, it's the world you're going to grow up in, and it's the world you're going to leave behind you. So I think, yeah, people just need to have that drive behind them to want to make a change.
Yasmin?
Yeah, I think that's a good one. I think that they need to be coming with like that blue sky thinking, because like we've been speaking about today, like the answer isn't there yet, and so it's going to require imagination and drive and yeah, just like that out of the box thinking, to really like push forward some like interesting and some crazy ideas. I think will be the ones that will get us through to. And also I think another one is that coming into this career, I think it's good to be kind of like an approachable person, or somebody who is quite empathetic with other people, because you're going to be the person who's trying to convince other people and trying to get everyone on board with what you're thinking and with your ideas and with your strategy for how you're going to hit net zero or hit whatever targets that you're hitting for sustainability. Yeah, you need to be able to talk to people, to reason with people, to hear their opinions and convince them of your own as well. So yeah, a bit of a mix, I think.
Stephanie?
I think it definitely, well, a good skill to have would be to really be able to not be disappointed in life, to take it as it comes, because we don't really know what the challenge, well, we don't know how we're going to face the challenges of tomorrow. So might as well keep an open mind, know how to adapt. Goes back to that resilience, kind of this ability to recover from a negative event, I think that's going to be essential for going forward, because the generations that come are not going to have the lives that we've had and the lives that our parents have had. So might as well keep an open mind and not just start a trial of the generations and say, well, you guys didn't do that, so that's why we're in the mess today. Just keep a happy spirit, I guess. Stay positive.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. And I think the story I always tell about my career is the job I started in when I graduated didn't exist anymore. And some of the roles I've seen and worked in now hadn't even been thought of when I graduated. So I think the really good thing about our profession is we are just so willing to change and handle whatever's thrown at us. I mean, it doesn't have to be quite as traumatic as the last 3 years, but it would be, yeah, I think we're just very good as a profession of something comes along and we respond and we deal with it. So really moving on from that one, what's gone right? What have we done as a profession or as an industry that's actually, you can go, wow, that actually really worked? Stephanie.
So I'm new to the industry, so I'm still discovering a lot of the positives that are coming out of the world that we work in. But it's always good to know when things are going well. So in the middle of a pandemic, when everyone was told to stay home, the industry kept working and managed to keep the world going, and also made itself very visible to everyone, because it is an invisible industry. It kind of works in the background. It works at nights. It works in giant warehouses on the outskirts of towns. And I think that was really positive, how not the essential aspect of we'll use you now and discard you later, but the visibility that was given to the industry. So keep it up, make yourself indispensable and visible, because otherwise people won't realize how much it counts.
Bobby?
I think one of a really good thing about companies at the minute is they are recognizing that they are having an environmental impacts, and they're paving the way to make change about that. I still think there's a lot more that needs to be done, but I think it's good to finally recognize like companies are wanting to go green. You always see at the bottom of your email like only print if really necessary. You didn't really have that even 5 years ago. So seeing that becoming more and more like everyday life is something that is a step forward.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yasmin?
Yeah, I think we're doing a lot better at getting this conversation out there. I mean, we're here talking about this today. I think that a lot more people are talking about it, and I think it starts by getting people on board as like part of the journey. I think also as a logistics sector and transport sector, I think there's a lot of people who are open and want to talk and are honest and are quite approachable about if you have a question, because I think that sustainability, we've said, there's not a clear answer. And so I think a lot of people are happy to have those conversations and to, work together to try and find that answer. And I think those conversations are happening, between different companies in the sector. And I think that's really helpful and really, really positive for what journey we're gonna go on.
No, excellent. We've got about 6 minutes left, so I'm hoping I can get 2 questions in. If I crash the time, I do apologise. But there's been a few comments about the cost of either new technologies or of going green or being sustainable. We're in a nobody knows the answer, but we're in a cost of living crisis as well. And how do we ensure that any costs that are derived, which are really for the benefit of the future and the planet, how are those handled fairly? I would like to say who should bear the cost, but where should that cost be borne? Should it be spread equally? Should it be the consumer? Should it be the supplier? Yeah, who pays, I guess, or should it be government? Who would like to answer that one? Stephanie? Yeah.
I'll dip my toe in.
Yeah.
Well, who pays? Definitely the planet's going to pay for any advances in technology, but all the costs will eventually be spread out depending on the company. Each company is going to decide to either pass it on to the consumer or take it on for themselves. The governments might try stepping in and helping, but all that wealth is being generated on non-renewable energy sources, non-renewable minerals. So it's all going to need to find a natural way down. And we are going to realize that things cost a lot more. The prices in the last 60 years have gone drastically down, but that's going to have to go back up to what they were at a certain point in time when energy was more expensive. And that was bared on the customer, but also on the companies, and there was less innovation and less technology.
Yasmin, do you want to add anything?
It's a hard one. I don't know where the cost lies. I mean, I do think the government needs to help. I think they should bear some of the costs, but I think in the end it probably will sit with the customers, because as companies pay more for their vehicles, their prices are going to up too. So I do think that there's a lot of technologies on the positive side. There's a lot of technologies where the payback is good, and in some cases better than the diesel alternative, and that is positive. But with the prices going up and up, that could well change in the future.
Thanks. Bobby, anything to add?
Yeah, I don't know where the cost lies necessarily, but I do think wherever it does lie is more of an investment. I think if the company invests in making things greener, then they'll have a reputation for being more sustainable and they'll make more business. I think if the consumer spends more money, they're going to value their goods more, and then they're going to want to reuse it or recycle it more. And I think if the government are investing in it, then they're going to have a better country to lead. So I think it really is, there's no downside to it. And I also think that in a lot of cases, it will cost less to go green. Such as bike deliveries, you get, it's less to run a bike, and it's you get more deliveries per hour. So I think it will even out. I think there are going to be huge costs at times, but I think it is more of an investment into our future and into the companies or consumers' future.
Excellent. And in the last couple of minutes I've got left, your very, very quick one thought: what can everybody do tomorrow, or what should they do tomorrow just to make it a better future? Bobby, I'll go back to you because I think I know yours.
Change your internet browser to Estonia. You could, even if you're just looking at one quick thing, it's trees, you're planting trees, so do it. Yeah.
Yasmin?
Talk about it more and educate the younger generation.
Thanks. Stephanie?
Learn useful skills on the side that can be handy when the electricity goes down. Stay home and consume less. Excellent.
Well, thank you very much to all my panel. It's been really, really enlightening and enjoyable. Thank you to everyone that raised questions. So I didn't manage to answer all of them. And it's just been really, really pleasurable experience. And we will be publishing the recording. And please, whatever you do tomorrow, just think about the environment and just, turn off one tap, recycle one can, and change your browser. Thank you very much. Goodbye.